Europe is facing an economic paradox that can no longer be ignored. Historically, we accepted high tax burdens in exchange for a robust welfare state, public healthcare, reliable infrastructure, free education. It was a clear bargain. Today, however, the data show that in many nations that bargain has begun to fracture. In this video, we will not simply rank who pays the most in taxes. We will go further. We will analyse the bad value index, the short circuit between what citizens pay into the state and the actual quality of the services they receive in return. A gap that is forcing millions of European workers into what can be described as double payment, funding an inefficient public system while simultaneously having to rely on the private sector for healthcare or transportation. Drawing exclusively on OECD reports, Eurostat data, and official macroeconomic figures for 2025 and 2026, we will examine the 12 nations where this structural divide is eroding the wealth of the middle class. But be warned, not everywhere is the system under strain. If you want to discover the European countries that represent the exact opposite, write Europe in the comments. Welcome to Amazing Europe. We begin our journey with a giant of the European economy. For decades, the United Kingdom was seen as a model of efficiency and pragmatism. Today, however, the data reveal that it has become an ailing giant. If you live in London, Birmingham, or Glasgow, you already know the feeling. You are paying historically high taxes, the highest since 1948 according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, yet you sense the state retreating from your daily life. The data confirm this perception. The National Health Service, once a source of pride, is now technically overwhelmed. By mid-2025, waiting lists for hospital treatment had reached 7.6 million people, as if more than the entire population of Switzerland were standing in line to see a doctor. And it is not only hospitals. A London-Manchester train ticket costs 3 times more than a Paris-Lyon one, yet reliability has collapsed. In 2024, 1 train out of 25 was cancelled. The privatisation of water has created an environmental disaster. Thames Water discharged untreated sewage for 300,000 hours in 2024, a 50% increase in just 1 year. Prisons are operating at 99% capacity. Local councils, including Birmingham, are declaring bankruptcy. However, it is not all bleak. Even as welfare services deteriorate, the United Kingdom offers a unique fiscal lifeboat in Europe, the individual savings account. While in Italy or France gains are eroded by taxation, here you can invest £20,000 per year in shares or funds, with profits and dividends entirely tax-free for life. This is the cynical British trade-off. The state provides increasingly poor public services, but allows those with liquidity to build private wealth shielded from taxation. Wealth that is now necessary to privately purchase the protections the public system no longer guarantees. A compromise that, for those who know how to leverage it, may still be worth the price of admission. Germany is the giant that has revealed itself to be fragile. For decades, a symbol of efficiency, it now suffers from worrying stagnation. The numbers are merciless. A single worker faces the second highest tax wedge in the world, 47.9%. Half of a salary disappears before it reaches the bank account. Where does that money go? Not into infrastructure. Deutsche Bahn, once the pride of German engineering, has become a national emergency. In 2025, punctuality on long-distance routes fell to 60%. 4 trains out of 10 are delayed or cancelled. This is not bad luck, it is neglect. For 20 years, net public investment has been negative. The result? Nearly 15% of German highway bridges are classified as being in poor or critical condition, or slated for demolition, as in the case of Lüdenscheid, which has paralysed traffic for years with daily detours and prolonged delivery times. But the real shock is digital. In 2025, Germany sits below the EU average for digitalisation of public services. While Estonia is fully digital, Berlin failed spectacularly to meet the target of the OZG law, which promised 575 administrative services online by the end of 2022. In 2026, most still require an in-person visit to a counter. And yet, there is one statistic that changes the perspective. The The German system reinvests taxes heavily in supporting families. University education is effectively free, and thanks to Kindergeld, the state pays roughly €250 a month per child, up to age 25 if they are studying. That amounts to more than €9,000 net a year for a family with 3 children, by right of citizenship. So yes, trains are late and bridges collapse, but Germany remains one of the few places where the state takes tangible responsibility for your children's future. France is a unique case. Here, we are not talking about a lack of resources. We are talking about the world record for public spending, approaching 58% of GDP. No country spends more on its state than France. But if you ask a citizen whether they really feel protected by this colossal investment, the answer is often tinged with frustration. Why? Look at the data. The tax wedge is 47.2%, yet millions live in so-called medical deserts, where it takes months to find a general practitioner. Safety is another sore point. Despite one of the highest public order expenditures in Europe, surveys show that 68% of French people feel less secure than they did 10 years ago. Add to that an education system sliding down the PISA rankings and public debt exploding to 114% of GDP in order to sustain this gigantic apparatus. The French paradox is exactly this. You pay for a limousine of state services, but the engine is misfiring and often leaves you stranded. Still, there is a reason many French people would never change their system. France possesses a secret weapon against high taxes. It is a brilliant mechanism that turns children into the best tax shield possible. In France, the state divides your income by the number of people at your table. The result is almost magical. The larger the family, the more taxes collapse. It is a brilliant mechanism that turns children into the best tax shield possible. In France, the state divides your income by the number of people at your table. The result is almost magical. The larger the family, the more taxes collapse. With 3 children, income tax for the middle class virtually disappears. It is the sole consolation. Declining public services, but thousands of euros each year staying in your pocket instead of ending up in the state coffers. Ireland is the perfect example of how a country can appear rich in the statistics and, at the same time, leave its citizens feeling trapped in real life. On paper, Ireland is an economic superpower, with GDP per capita rivaling that of Qatar. But beware, that figure is artificially inflated by multinational profits routed through Dublin without ever touching the real economy. The true indicator, the modified gross national income, tells us that the real Ireland is 40% poorer than the statistical one, and yet the cost of living is superpower level. The problem here is not so much that the state taxes labour too heavily, the tax wedge is around the European average. The problem is the invisible tax. The state has failed to build the necessary infrastructure. The result is an unprecedented housing crisis. In Dublin, average rent has exceeded €2,300 per month, swallowing more than 50% of a typical worker's net salary. It is an artificial famine. The money exists, but the homes do not. Nor do hospital beds. By mid-2025, healthcare waiting lists counted more than 716,000 people. In a country of just 5 million inhabitants, that means nearly 15% of the population is waiting for treatment. However, there is another side to the coin that often escapes criticism. Ireland is one of the few countries in Europe where earning little means paying almost nothing. The Irish tax system radically protects low incomes. The first €18,000 to €20,000 are virtually untouched by taxation. But be careful, you do not need to be wealthy to fall into the trap. It is enough to be an average employee. Once you exceed €42,000 to €44,000, the rate jumps to 40%, and with additional levies, the state takes more than 50% of every extra euro earned. It is a ruthless system toward the middle class, yet extremely protective of those on lower incomes who are trying to climb the ladder. Hungary is the perfect laboratory for understanding how a state can give you the illusion of paying little while quietly emptying your wallet. If you look only at income tax, it seems like paradise, a 15% flat tax, among the lowest in Europe. But it is bait. The moment you pull up at a petrol station or buy groceries, the trap is sprung. Hungary holds the world record for VAT at 27%. While leaving you a few extra forints in your paycheck, the state claws back nearly a third of every purchase. It is a regressive tax that hits everyone hard, compounded by food inflation that has eroded purchasing power, which remains 30% below the EU average. Despite the low flat tax, social security contributions remain heavy, pushing labour costs to levels comparable with the major European countries, yet without equivalent services. The healthcare system is so underfunded that turning to private providers is often the only way to avoid endless waiting lists. In Hungary, the state says, "Keep your money," but waits at the checkout to take it back. And yet, there is a radical exception: demographic policy. The government rewards motherhood in a way that is virtually unique worldwide. If you are a mother of 4 children, and from 2025 also of 3, you will never again pay income tax. For life, regardless of your success. For the tax authorities, your debt is considered settled by bringing the next generation into the world. If you think the tax problem stops at the EU borders, you are very mistaken. Just outside, in the Balkans, you find the purest and most brutal form of bad value: almost European taxes for non-existent services. Let's start with Serbia. Here, the paradox is visual. Luxury skyscrapers rise in Belgrade, but the statistical reality is a punch in the gut. Do not be fooled by the official average wage of about €900. That figure is inflated by the high incomes in the capital. The statistic that tells the truth is the median income reported by Eurostat. In 2024, it was just €533 per month. And here, the math becomes cruel. According to Numbeo, the cost of living in Belgrade for a single person, excluding rent, is about €677. You read that right. For 50% of Serbs, income is not enough even to eat and pay bills, let alone afford rent. Yet the state gives no concessions. The tax wedge, especially on low incomes, is oppressive. Between pension contributions, health levies, and income taxes, the total take approaches 40% of labour costs, levels similar to those in the European Union. And what does such a demanding state give you in return? A collapsing healthcare system. Waiting lists for orthopaedic operations in cities like Niš exceed 2 years. If you have urgent pain, you either pay a private clinic or wait forever. You pay mandatory health contributions every month, 10.3% of salary. Yet in practice, you end up paying twice for care. But if Serbia is a bad bargain, Albania is the absolute record holder for double payment. According to the World Health Organization, Albania has the highest out-of-pocket health expenditure rate in Europe, 60%. That means that of every €10 spent on health, €6 come straight from the citizen's pocket. The public system is a ghost. It exists on paper, but when you fall ill, you are on your own. Corruption makes everything worse. 25% of users admit to having paid a bribe in the last year. The result of this state failure is a mass exodus. 47% of graduates have already left the country. However, this chaos offers a lifeboat for entrepreneurs. Albania has abolished profit taxes for small businesses up to €140,000 in turnover, and Serbia still offers fast lanes for the tech sector, albeit not as generously as 5 years ago. It is the Balkan bargain. The state gives you nothing when you need it, but if you are willing to navigate bureaucracy and pay privately for every service, it will let you build your business under a tax pressure the rest of Europe can only dream about. Welcome to the final block of countries. The climate is great and the food fantastic here, but for local workers, these tourist paradises have become inescapable financial traps. Let's begin with Italy, the country that embodies the triple short circuit. Italy is the only nation in the world that manages to combine three negative records at once: Scandinavian-level tax pressure, declining services, and a suffocating public debt. The tax wedge exceeds 45%, but unlike in Norway, here the citizen has the mathematical certainty of not receiving back services of a quality proportional to what they pay. The cause is the ballast of the past. With debt above 137% of GDP, about 85 billion euros of Italians' taxes are burned every year just to pay interest, instead of financing schools or hospitals. It's like paying an onerous mortgage on a house that's falling apart. As a result, the state retreats. Private healthcare spending explodes, forcing Italians to pay out of pocket to bypass now unsustainable waiting lists. And yet, there is an escape valve: the regime forfettario. It is an extremely competitive system for freelancers and small entrepreneurs. Those with turnover below 85,000 euros are exempt from the heavy ordinary progressive taxation and pay a substitute flat tax of 15%, which falls to 5% for the first 5 years. Mandatory social security contributions still apply, of course, but the bureaucracy is much simplified. It is not a tax haven, but a cynical compromise. While employees give up almost half their salary to secure holidays, sick pay, and unemployment benefits, the self-employed obtain a much higher net income, accepting, however, to operate without any social safety net. This is Italy's great contradiction: an obstacle course for employees, but a fast lane for those brave enough to risk going it alone without a safety net. Spain is often cited as an example of post-pandemic economic growth, but for those who live and work there, the reality is much harsher. Here, the bad value is not only in services, but in the state's chronic inability to guarantee a fundamental right: employment. Despite recent improvements, the country still posts one of the Eurozone's highest unemployment rates, around 10%, with youth unemployment stubbornly above 23%. And yet, the weight of the state is growing. The government has tightened taxation with the intergenerational equity mechanism. In other words, an extra levy taken directly from every payslip to fill an emergency fund for the imminent wave of baby boomer retirements. The tax wedge approaches 40%, a level typical of Nordic countries, applied to a fragile, precarious labour market. The Spanish worker finds themselves caught in a vice. On one side, they pay rising taxes to fund a welfare state that looks generous on paper. On the other, they face notoriously inefficient employment services and a bureaucracy that strangles entrepreneurship. In Spain, you pay a premium subscription to the state, yet the main service, employment, is not guaranteed. However, there is an elite for whom Spain is a paradise: qualified foreigners. Thanks to the Beckham Law, Madrid rolls out the red carpet for global talent. While a local worker can end up surrendering half their salary to tax, an inbound worker pays a flat 24% tax for 6 years on employment income up to 600,000 euros. It is a two-speed system. If you are Spanish, you are trapped. If you come from abroad, you enjoy Mediterranean sun at quasi-offshore rates. Portugal is the country of the wage paradox. Here, unemployment is roughly half Spain's, yet there is a cruel catch. The government raised the minimum wage in 2026 to 920 euros, a figure that looks like a victory, but which in reality is dragging the whole economy downward. Consider this: more than 35% of Portuguese workers now earn very close to the minimum. The gap between an unskilled employee and a professional has shrunk to a few hundred euros. An engineer or a nurse often takes home 1,200 to 1,300 euros net, amounts that in Northern Europe would not even cover rent. And rent is the coup de grace. In Lisbon, a decent one-bedroom now costs more than the average worker earns. The Portuguese citizen thus competes for housing with tourists and American digital nomads while earning about a third of their incomes. The result is a mass exodus. According to the Observatory of Emigration, 30% of young Portuguese already live abroad. The state trains them and spends on their education, and they take the first flight to London or Zurich. Staying behind means working hard simply to survive. However, the country offers an emergency exit reserved for newcomers. Under the updated favourable tax regime, those who have not been tax residents in Portugal for the past 5 years and who perform qualified professions can access a flat 20% tax rate for 10 years. It is a cynical incentive. It rewards foreign talent and returning Portuguese after years abroad, offering a fiscal parachute denied to those who had the misfortune to stay. In recent years, Portugal has been praised for its economic recovery, but we have seen the cost. Eastern Europe levels of wages facing Western Europe living costs. And there is yet another country crowned as the economic miracle of 2025, where the recovery exists only in newspapers and much less in people's pockets. But before we reveal it, if you found this video informative, please support our project with a like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you don't miss our videos. And remember, if you want to know which countries actually use taxes to improve citizens' quality of life, write Europe in the comments. Greece is the country financial papers call the economic miracle of 2025. If you read The Economist, Greece is back. If you speak with a Greek, they will tell you things are not so simple. Yes, GDP is growing, but people's real lives tell a different story. The country has the second lowest median wages in the Eurozone, below €1,000 net. Yet for essentials like milk, coffee and household goods, your receipt is often identical, if not higher, than a German's. You pay VAT at 24%, one of the highest rates in Europe, on basic goods and services. Petrol costs more than in Sweden, and electricity is among the most expensive on the continent. The miracle came at a heavy price. The dismantling of public healthcare, deregulated employment contracts, and a cost of living that has completely eroded purchasing power. Athens has become a playground for tourists and property investors, while locals are being pushed to the margins and forced to take 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Greece is the perfect example of how macro numbers can look green while household accounts are deep in the red. However, there is a sweetener that tempts many. The government has launched an extremely aggressive tax regime for those who move their tax residence to the country. A straight 50% cut in taxes for a full 7 years. Whether you are employee or freelancer, if you relocate to work under the Parthenon, you will pay half the taxes of a local Greek. I know what you're thinking. So is there no hope? Is Europe doomed to decline? Absolutely not. In Europe, there are countries, some unexpected, where taxes come back to you as excellent services, or where bureaucracy serves the citizen rather than the other way around. If you want to know which ones they are, what their secret is and whether their model could work in your country, let us know with a like and by typing Europe in the comments. Also, write in the comments your country and the one thing that you think works far worse than it costs. The thing that makes you say, "Where are my taxes going?" For a broader view, we recommend watching our video on the 10 European countries that will struggle most to pay pensions in the coming years. That's it for this video. See you next time.